Cole Mercer walked into the ballroom of the Mercer Grand Ellison in a dusty work shirt, oil on his right cuff, boots still damp from an hour in the mechanical room below. Beneath crystal chandeliers, guests in tuxedos and gowns turned to stare the way people stare at a scuff mark on marble. Tyler Knox narrowed his eyes. "Who let maintenance into my gala?" A few guests laughed. Claire Vaughn looked over once and said nothing. Cole opened his mouth, but Tyler had already raised a hand at security. "Get him out." 5 minutes later, Warren Hale rushed through the side corridor, voice barely steady. "You just threw out the man who owns this hotel. Why would a single father in dirty clothes be thrown out of his own gala, and why did he choose to let it happen?" The Mercer Grand Ellison had spent a decade earning its reputation, not through the loudness of its brand, but through the quality of every detail that most guests never thought to notice. The lobby ceiling rose 40 feet above the marble floor, its crown molding inlaid with hand-applied gold leaf that caught the chandelier light differently depending on the hour. On its 10th anniversary, the hotel had gathered the most impressive guest list in the city under one roof. Technology executives who managed portfolios larger than the budgets of mid-sized countries. Investors whose names appeared on buildings across 3 continents. A handful of journalists from luxury lifestyle publications, and several international event partners considering long-term contracts with the Mercer Grand brand. It was, by every visible measure, exactly the kind of evening the hotel had been built for. Tyler Knox had been overseeing event operations at Mercer Grand Ellison for 14 months, and he treated every major function like a performance where he himself was the leading role. He had arrived at the property 3 hours before the first guest, walking the ballroom floor in a fitted charcoal suit, adjusting the spacing between table centerpieces with the focused intensity of someone who believed the world would notice every centimeter. He had personally approved the menu substitutions, rejected the original floral arrangement in favor of something that photographed better, and briefed the front-of-house staff twice, once for procedure, and once to remind them that the caliber of tonight's guest list reflected directly on the caliber of everyone in the room. Tyler Knox liked things polished, structured, and under his control. He also liked the distinction between the people in his ballroom and the people who kept it running. Claire Vaughn had come for business, though she moved through the cocktail reception the way people move through spaces they were designed to be seen in. Her company, Vaughn Luxury Events, had coordinated some of the most exclusive private functions in the country, and she was in active negotiation with Mercer Grand's hospitality group for a multi-year partnership contract that would give her firm anchor status for the hotel's full event calendar. She had reviewed the property's performance data, read the brand materials, and spoken with Tyler twice by phone. Tonight was meant to be the final impression before signatures. She sipped a glass of still water and watched the room settle into its pre-dinner rhythm, noting which guests talked to which, and filing the information away the way professional observers always do. 3 floors below the ballroom, in a service corridor that smelled of industrial lubricant and recycled air, nothing was running as planned. The backup power system, a redundant generator array that was supposed to provide seamless continuity if the primary electrical circuit experienced any disruption, had developed a voltage instability problem that the maintenance team had flagged twice in the previous 6 weeks. Both flags had been quietly deprioritized. The maintenance budget for the 3rd quarter had been reduced by 22%, a decision that Tyler Knox had authorized in an email with the phrase, "Prioritize guest-facing expenditures." As the ballroom filled with 500 guests upstairs, The engineering team below was working through a problem they did not have the parts to properly fix, using a workaround that required someone with enough electrical knowledge to monitor the relay switches manually through the evening. Cole Mercer had walked into the mechanical room through the service entrance without announcing himself. He had not come wearing a hard hat or carrying a clipboard. He had come in slacks and a dress shirt, the shirt now covered in the particular grayish-brown of old pipe insulation, and for the past 50 minutes he had been crouched beside a relay panel with a 24-year-old engineer named Evan Brooks, who had the look of a man waiting for something catastrophic to happen while trying not to show it. Cole had assessed the situation in the first 10 minutes, understood what they were working around and why, and begun doing what he had always done when systems failed. Problem-solving with what was there. He tightened 2 connections that had been overlooked, recalibrated the voltage regulator using a manual override that most people in his position would not have known existed, and stabilized the output enough to carry the event through the night. The crystals upstairs kept their glow. No one in the ballroom ever came close to knowing the lights had nearly gone out. When the repair was stable and Evan finally exhaled, Cole stood and rolled down his right sleeve over the oil on his cuff. The young engineer looked like he was still deciding whether to apologize for the condition of the room or the condition of the hotel's maintenance budget. Cole looked at him steadily and said, "At this hotel, the person who reports a problem is not the one who gets punished. The person who hides one does." Evan nodded slowly, the words settling somewhere more lasting than reassurance. Cole turned toward the service elevator. He needed to speak with Tyler Knox about budget decisions that had nearly darkened 500 people's evening. He did not yet know how that conversation was going to go. He was about to find out. The service elevator let Cole out onto the main floor, through a door behind the coat check, and he stepped into the ballroom from a direction that no invited guest would have taken. He was not wearing a badge. He was wearing a shirt that had clearly been through something, and that was what the room noticed first. The conversations nearest to him quieted as he moved across the edge of the dance floor, and that quiet spread the way it always does when something visually inconsistent enters a curated space. Several guests simply stared. A man in a European-cut black suit leaned to the woman beside him and said something that made her laugh behind her champagne glass. Brooke Callahan, who managed event logistics and had spent the past several hours ensuring that every visible inch of the ballroom presented flawlessly, looked up from her tablet and felt a cold drop of professional dread run through her. She had no idea who this man was, only that he did not look like he belonged in her ballroom right now. Tyler Knox crossed the floor in 12 seconds. He had a gift for moving quickly without appearing to hurry, a skill developed by people who spend their careers managing appearances. He positioned himself between Cole and the center of the room and looked him over with the kind of expression that contained no ambiguity about its conclusion. "This is a private gala," Tyler said, keeping his voice just loud enough for the nearest tables to hear. "Staff entrance is downstairs." Cole looked at him without hostility. "I know. I just came from there." Tyler's expression shifted slightly, not to confusion exactly, but to the irritated certainty of a man who had encountered defiance from someone he had already categorized. He assumed he was dealing with a maintenance worker who had taken a wrong turn on purpose, and in Tyler Knox's experience, that situation had a straightforward resolution. A man 2 tables over, a venture capital partner whose name frequently appeared in business publications, watched the exchange with visible amusement. "At least someone here knows how to fix a sink," he said. to no one in particular. The people near him laughed. It was not a cruel laugh exactly. It was the kind of laughter that required someone to be below the room for anyone else to be above it. Claire Vaughn heard it from where she stood near the bar. She looked at Cole, studying him the way she had been studying the room all evening, efficiently, without visible judgment, and she noticed something that did not fit the category Tyler had assigned him. The man in the dirty shirt was not embarrassed. He was not defensive. He was looking at Tyler with the calm of someone who had already decided how a moment was going to end and was simply waiting for it to catch up. Claire did not say anything. She looked away. Tyler told him that he was tracking soil on a carpet that cost more per square foot than some people made in a week, and that the presence of someone presenting themselves as he did was unacceptable on an evening like this. He said it with the fluency of a man who had said similar things before and never been corrected for it. Cole looked around the room, at the chandeliers, the floral arrangements, the guests in their tailored finery, and then he looked back at Tyler. If a dirty shirt embarrasses this hotel, Cole said, then maybe it was never as elegant as you think it is. Tyler blinked. The words landed with an odd weight because they were delivered quietly and without performance, and the people nearby who heard them were not quite sure what to do with them. Tyler decided it did not matter. He raised 2 fingers at the security team. Cole was not hurt by the assumption that he was maintenance. He had worked maintenance. He understood what it meant to carry tools and wear stains and be invisible to the people who benefited from your work. What cut through the air and settled somewhere deeper was the word staff in Tyler's mouth, the way it landed like something to be removed, like an element the room needed to be cleared of. Cole had spent 2 decades building something precisely because that word had never deserved the contempt it was given. He stood still as the security team reached him, and he did not argue, did not explain, did not reach for anything that would have made the moment end differently. He walked with them because he was watching something unfold, and he had not yet finished watching. The corridor outside the ballroom was quiet in the way that back-of-house spaces are always quiet. A different kind of silence than the orchestrated hush inside, more like the silence of things that don't need to perform. Cole walked the length of it without being guided, and the 2 security officers who accompanied him did so with visible discomfort. He had not resisted, had not raised his voice, had not made the situation any harder than Tyler had already made it. That calm created its own problem for the men assigned to enforce the removal, because escorting a troublemaker out of a building is straightforward, but escorting someone who clearly does not see himself as one feels different in ways that are hard to name. Brooke Callahan caught up to them near the end of the passage and delivered an apology that was technically genuine and professionally hollow in equal measure. She said she was sorry for the confusion, that the evening had a strict protocol, that she hoped he understood. Cole told her he understood completely. Tyler Knox appeared at the ballroom threshold long enough to deliver what he apparently intended as a closing remark. Some people, he said, need to remember which door they belong to. Cole turned and looked at him for a moment without expression. "I'll remember that," he said. Tyler nodded once, satisfied with the outcome, and returned to his party. He had no way of knowing those 4 words would follow him for the rest of his career. In the service corridors behind the ballroom, a small cluster of maintenance and kitchen staff had watched Cole being walked out and reacted with a particular kind of distress. Different from general upset, the distress of people who had just watched something wrong happen to someone who specifically did not deserve it. Evan Brooks had told 2 colleagues what had happened in the mechanical room. How the man in the dirty shirt had spent an hour stabilizing a system set up to fail by months of budget neglect. How he had done it without blaming anyone. How he had spoken to Evan with the directness and steadiness of someone long accustomed to fixing things quietly. None of them knew who Cole was. They only knew that the person being treated like an intruder had just kept their jobs from becoming a catastrophe, and the person who had ordered him removed had not been anywhere near the mechanical room at any point in the evening. Cole stood in the outer corridor and took out his phone. He was not angry in the way the situation might have warranted, not in a way that needed immediate expression. He had learned early in his career that the hottest moments were rarely the right ones for the most important decisions. He wanted to understand what he was dealing with, how far Tyler's authority had stretched unchecked, who in the building would say something and who would stay quiet, whether the staff below had been conditioned into silence or had simply never been given a reason to believe that honesty was safe. He dialed Naomi Pierce, who had been his chief operating officer for 11 years and knew the sound of his voice well enough to read everything that was not in the words. "Bring everything you have on Tyler's operations to the ballroom," he told her. "It's time." There was a brief pause. 10 minutes, she said, and ended the call. Standing in that corridor, Cole thought about Paige, about a Thursday evening years earlier when she had finished a housekeeping shift at a hotel across town and decided to wait for Cole in the lobby rather than on the street. She had been in her work uniform, still carrying her supply cart, and the man at the front desk had told her the lobby was for guests and asked her to wait outside. She had waited in the rain. Cole had found her there, her hair flat against her forehead, and she had told him the story the way people tell stories they've decided not to be broken by. They had stood together under the awning for a long time without speaking, and Paige had said, if they ever had a place of their own with their name on the door, no one would ever be asked to stand in the rain because of what they were wearing. Cole had made that promise without conditions. It was the kind of promise that outlasts the person you made it to. Inside the ballroom, Tyler Knox raised a glass and began what promised to be a generous remarks segment about his vision for the Mercer Grand experience and what he called the hotel's uncompromising commitment to world-class hospitality. Cole Mercer had not always stood on the ownership side of the door. He had, for the better part of his 20s, been on the other side, the invisible side, the side that kept things running without being included in the running of things. He had spent 3 years as a bellman at the Crawford House, a mid-range hotel in a city that took its hospitality seriously enough to keep the carpets clean and the thermostat in the lobby at a consistent 68 degrees. He had carried bags for people who never looked at his face and accepted tips from people who did not require a name to accompany the gesture. It was honest work, and he took it seriously. He took most things seriously. It was at the Crawford House that he met Paige. She worked housekeeping, 3rd floor through 6th, and she had the particular quality of someone who notices everything happening in a room without calling attention to her own noticing. They would eat lunch together in the staff room on alternating days when their breaks overlapped, and somewhere in those conversations, over bad coffee and questions about where they thought their lives were going, something between them became something else entirely. They did not rush it. Neither of them had the kind of history that made rushing feel safe. They had both seen the same things in different corners of the building, the way certain guests treated staff as extensions of the furniture to be adjusted or ignored according to convenience. They had watched a man berate a front desk colleague for 11 minutes over a room category he could not prove he had requested. They had watched colleagues absorb insults with professional smiles and exhale in stairwells. It was a particular kind of education. Page had said once, during one of their lunch conversations, that the most truly luxurious hotel she could imagine was not the one with the most impressive stone floors or the most elaborate tasting menu. It was the one where the people who worked there were not afraid to be seen making a mistake, where dignity was not a perk reserved for the guests, where the back of the house was treated as if it mattered at least as much as the front. Cole had written none of this down. He had not needed to. Some ideas settle into a person's architecture rather than their notes. Page had died 11 years ago, from a diagnosis that arrived without courtesy and moved without hesitation. Cole had been 41. Their son Nolan had been 6. In the years that followed, Cole had done what grief sometimes forces. He worked with an intensity that could have been destructive, but turned instead toward construction, because what he was building was something he had promised, and promises made to people who can no longer hold you to them are the hardest kind to walk away from. He purchased a run-down motel property on the edge of a recovering downtown corridor with savings from 3 years of side contracts and a small business loan that had taken 7 months to qualify for. He hired back staff from 2 hotels that had closed nearby, retained every employee who wanted to stay, and refused from the first week to build a culture based on hierarchy and fear. He was very specific about that. He repeated it often enough that it became structural rather than aspirational. The Mercer Grand brand had grown carefully and without the shortcuts that produce impressive openings and hollow legacies. 5 properties in 11 years, each one designed with the understanding that a person in a maintenance uniform would walk through the same front door as a person in a business suit and receive the same baseline of dignity. Cole had stayed out of the press deliberately. He had no interest in being a face that people associated with the brand. He wanted the culture to function when he was not in the room. That was the only test worth running. But recently, the reports from the Ellison had troubled him. Not dramatically. The trouble was quieter. Exit interviews from staff describing a culture of surveillance and dismissal, maintenance requests that cycled through the system and vanished, an atmosphere around Tyler Knox that treated the back of house as a necessary inconvenience. Cole had not called Tyler. He had not sent an investigator. He had come himself, the way he always came when he wanted to understand something honestly, without the apparatus of authority that changes what people show you. From the outer corridor, he could see the ballroom through the side glass, where Tyler Knox stood at a podium positioned perfectly to catch the chandelier's light, preparing to speak about excellence. Tyler Knox spoke the way people speak when they have rehearsed, without appearing to have rehearsed, with fluency, with warmth, with the occasional strategic pause that creates the impression of thoughtfulness. He thanked the guests for attending the 10th anniversary of a hotel he described as a living expression of genuine excellence. He mentioned the partnerships they had built, the standards they had maintained, the future they were creating together. He said that the Mercer Grand brand stood for something that had become rare in the industry, an absolute refusal to accept anything less than perfection in every guest interaction. The word sloppiness, he said, was simply not in the hotel's vocabulary. There was applause. Claire Vaughn listened with the attention she brought to all professional presentations, the kind that separates substance from structure. She heard the word sloppiness and thought involuntarily of the man in the dirty shirt who had been removed from the room 20 minutes earlier. She thought of his face when Tyler had spoken to him. She returned her attention to the podium. Brooke Callahan had moved to the edge of the room near the service entrance when Evan Brooks appeared in the doorway. He was still in his work clothes, and he spoke quickly, in the manner of people carrying information they are not sure they are allowed to have. He told Brooke that the man who had been removed was the same man who had spent the better part of the evening in the mechanical room stabilizing the backup power relay, that without that work, the building's lighting system would have failed during the reception. Brooke stared at him. She asked how he knew. He said he had been there, crouched on the floor beside him for nearly an hour. Brooke absorbed this. She did not yet know who Cole was. She only knew that she had helped remove someone who had kept the lights on. Claire made her way to Tyler during the applause break between remarks and asked him quietly whether there had been any technical issues earlier in the evening. She had heard something mentioned by one of the catering staff. Tyler produced the smile of someone declining to acknowledge a thing. He said the evening had gone flawlessly, that the team had executed to the highest standard, that there was nothing she needed to concern herself with. It was a smooth answer delivered with total confidence, and Cole would have recognized it immediately. The sound of someone managing an impression rather than responding to a question. Evan, standing near the service door, said something to a colleague that was overheard and relayed in the direction of a nearby VIP table. Tyler saw the chain of it happening. The whisper, the turned head, the raised eyebrow, and crossed the floor in time to position himself close to Evan. "Staff doesn't talk to guests during service," he said, his voice low and flat, saying a rule while meaning a warning. Evan went quiet. Claire, who had been watching from near the bar, set down her glass. Naomi Pierce came through the main entrance, carrying a document, folio, pressed under her arm with the deliberate casualness of someone not wanting to signal urgency. She moved through the room without greeting anyone, heading toward a position near the far wall where she could see the full ballroom. 2 minutes behind her came Warren Hale, who had served as general manager of the Mercer Grand Ellison for 7 of its 10 years before stepping back to a consulting role the previous spring. He was 63, with the bearing of someone who had spent a career being the most reliable person in whatever room he entered. When he stepped through the door, Tyler Knox from across the ballroom saw him and did something small with his jaw. Warren surveyed the room with the thoroughness of long habit and said, to no one in particular, "Where is Cole?" Tyler materialized beside him with a composed expression. "Which Cole?" he said. It was the wrong answer. Warren looked at him for a moment without speaking, then found Brooke across the room. She told him, in a voice she could not quite keep even, that a man in a stained work shirt had been escorted from the ballroom approximately 30 minutes ago after Tyler had signaled security to remove him. Warren's face did not change dramatically. It simply went still. "You did what?" he said. The question was quiet enough that no one more than 3 feet away could hear it, and it was the kind of quiet that is louder than raising a voice. Warren Hale did not run. He moved through the side corridor with the steady speed of someone for whom urgency does not require a visible expression. He found Cole near the far end of the passage, standing beside a window that overlooked the service courtyard, his phone in his hand, his shirt still carrying every mark of the evening's work. Warren put a hand briefly on Cole's arm, not apologetic exactly, but acknowledging something that did not need to be named. And they walked back toward the ballroom together, without discussion. The room noticed Warren's return before it noticed Cole's. Warren was known to the industry people present, known as someone who had run this property through its most formative years, and his presence carried the specific gravity of a person whose judgment had always been worth having. When he walked in with a man in a stained work shirt at his side, the attention the room gave them was the kind that precedes something. Conversations quieted at the edges. Tyler Knox, who had been answering a question from one of the international event partners, looked up and found Cole standing at the center of the room, and for the first time that evening, something in his expression shifted from management to uncertainty. He crossed the floor immediately. The thing about Tyler Knox was that he was not unintelligent. He was precisely bright enough to recognize a situation before it explained itself, and precisely confident enough to believe he could still manage it. "Mr. Hale," he said, with the tone of a man redirecting a narrative in progress, "I was handling a protocol issue. Someone without event credentials had entered the main space." Warren looked at him steadily. "He's not your staff member," Warren said. Tyler adjusted his approach. "A contractor, then. The important thing is the protocol was—" "He is not your contractor," Warren said. He said it plainly, without elaboration, and it landed with the weight of something that has been building for a long time. Then he turned to face the room, the tables of investors and executives and partners, the journalists with their phones half drawn, Claire Vaughn standing very still near the bar, Brooke Callahan with her tablet against her chest, and he said in a voice that carried to every corner without effort, "That man owns this hotel." And every hotel with the Mercer name on the wall. The silence that followed was not the silence between songs or the silence of an audience awaiting a cue. It was the silence of a room recalibrating. Claire Vaughn stared at Cole with the expression of someone recognizing a pattern they should have identified earlier. Brooke Callahan's tablet slipped from her hands and caught on the edge of a chair before reaching the floor. Tyler Knox's face underwent a visible process. Not a single expression, more like several arriving too quickly to separate. He went pale in the specific way that people go pale when the structure that supported their confidence is removed in a single sentence. Naomi Pierce moved forward from the far wall. She confirmed, in the clipped professional tone of someone who had anticipated this moment for most of the evening, that Cole Mercer was the founder and majority owner of the Mercer Grand Hotels Group, that the property's founding documents bore his name, and that Mr. Mercer had arrived at the Ellison that evening as part of an unannounced operational review, a practice he had conducted at all 5 Mercer Grand properties in the preceding 2 years. She also confirmed, for anyone who had not yet heard, that Mr. Mercer had spent the first hour of the anniversary gala in the mechanical room 3 floors below, working alongside the engineering team to prevent a power failure caused by a system inadequately maintained due to budget reductions authorized at the operations management level. The venture capitalist who had made the sink joke looked down at his glass. The woman beside him found the floral centerpiece suddenly interesting. Cole stood in the middle of the room, not at a podium, not elevated in any way, not staged for maximum effect. He was standing in the same clothes he had come in with, in the same posture he had held all evening. He looked at Tyler Knox for a moment before he spoke, and when he spoke, he did not speak loudly. "You removed me because you decided I was a maintenance worker," Cole said. "I want to be clear that that is not what concerns me." He paused. "What concerns me is simpler, even if I were only a maintenance worker, even if that's all I was, you would still have believed you had the right to speak to me the way you did. The title on my business card didn't make your behavior wrong. It was already wrong before Warren walked through that door." No one in the room offered a sound. Claire Vaughn took 2 steps forward. She had the composure of someone accustomed to presenting herself well, and composure was not entirely what she had right now. "Mr. Mercer," she said. I stood there. I didn't say a word. Cole looked at her without performance and without satisfaction at her discomfort. "Sometimes silence is just a quieter way of standing on the wrong side," he said. It was not a verdict. It was something closer to an observation, the kind that has no clean, immediate answer. The chandelier light fell across the room exactly as it had all evening. 500 people stood in the most expensive room in a building owned by a man in a dirty shirt, and not one of them, in that moment, was entirely sure what came next. The document folio Naomi carried was not symbolic. It contained 14 months of operational records from the Mercer Grand Ellison, budget authorizations, maintenance request logs, staff scheduling data, incident reports, and a series of internal communications between Tyler Knox and various department heads. She placed it on the nearest table and opened it without ceremony. The maintenance operating budget had been reduced by 22% in the third quarter, the reduction authorized by Tyler Knox in writing with the stated intention of reallocating funds toward guest experience enhancements. 3 formal maintenance requests, including the one for the backup power relay that Cole had repaired that evening, had been received, logged, and not actioned for periods ranging from 6 to 11 weeks. Staff scheduling records for October showed 14 individuals in kitchen, housekeeping, and engineering who had worked in excess of 55 hours in a single week without the supplementary compensation their contracts specified. 2 incident reports from the previous quarter had been submitted and never forwarded to the regional operations team as required by the group's internal protocols. And there were receipts for branded materials, a professional photography session, and 2 trade event registrations, all charged to the property's operating account under a line item labeled brand representation, all of which had produced no business outcome traceable to the property. Tyler Knox said that he had made those decisions with the full caliber of the Mercer Grand guest experience in mind. He said the reality of operating a luxury property required constant prioritization, that not every budget line could receive equal attention, that the evening had demonstrated the execution had met the highest standard. He said these things with declining conviction that was audible to everyone in the room by the time he reached the end of his final sentence. Cole looked at him. "Luxury without dignity," Cole said, "is just expensive cruelty." Evan Brooks was standing near the service door. Cole looked at him and asked him to come forward. Evan hesitated. The hesitation of someone whose professional instincts had been trained over 14 months to treat visibility as risk. Cole said, "No one in this building tonight loses anything for telling the truth. That is not a temporary offer." Evan came forward. He spoke for 3 minutes, quietly and factually, about the conditions in the mechanical and engineering departments over the past several months. The overtime without compensation, the deferred repairs, the instruction from management not to raise operational issues above the department supervisor level. 2 other staff members followed. Their voices were careful, but they were present. Brooke Callahan stood near the edge of the group and listened with the look of someone recounting all the things she had noticed and quietly filed under "not my concern." Claire Vaughn stepped forward before Cole had said anything further. She did not reach for elegance in how she spoke. She said she had come to this property prepared to evaluate it as a business partner, and she had watched a man be removed from the room and said nothing. Because he had not matched the image of the event, because she had not felt it was her moment to enter. She said she was not proud of that. It was brief. It was also accurate. Tyler Knox was informed he was suspended from his operational duties effective immediately, that a full review of his management tenure would be conducted, and that he should return his access credentials to the property before the end of the week. He walked out of the ballroom without further comment, and the room watched him go, with varying degrees of expression. Cole asked the event staff to continue the evening. He asked them to change one thing, the remarks program. Rather than investor recognition only, the final portion of the evening would acknowledge the teams who had actually built the night: housekeeping, kitchen, maintenance, security, front of house. Some guests looked uncertain about what the appropriate response to this announcement might look like. Then Evan Brooks and 6 colleagues from engineering and facilities walked into the ballroom through the service door in their work clothes, and the uncertainty in the room resolved itself into something more genuine. The applause started at one table and moved outward. It was real. Cole stood at the edge of the stage, not on it, and said what he said every time he had the opportunity to say it in a room like this. If you're standing under working lights tonight, if the wine is cold, if the music found you when it was supposed to, there are people who worked 3 floors below this room, so you would never have to think about any of that. That is not a footnote. That is the whole building. When the formal portion was over, Claire made her way to him across the emptying dance floor and asked, directly and without maneuvering, whether a partnership between Vaughn Luxury Events and the Mercer Grand Group was still something worth discussing. The review of Tyler Knox's tenure produced findings consistent with what the files had suggested, and he was removed from his position within the week without contest. The operational decisions he had made, the maintenance deferrals, the scheduling violations, the unreported incidents, became the basis for a set of policy revisions Cole implemented across the Mercer Grand Group over the following month. At the Ellisons specifically, the changes were concrete and immediate. Staff at every level received a direct reporting channel for operational issues, separate from their department management chain, with a guaranteed response time and a written commitment from ownership that no report would result in adverse action against the person who submitted it. The maintenance operating budget was restored and ring-fenced against discretionary reallocation. Every manager with guest-facing authority was required to complete 1 full working shift alongside back-of-house staff each quarter, not as a symbolic exercise, but as a structural requirement of continued position. And the property adopted a policy, stated plainly in service agreements for private events and VIP bookings, that guests who verbally demeaned hotel staff would receive a formal notification and, upon repetition, would be asked to take their business elsewhere. It was the kind of policy that cost something to enforce. Cole had expected that. He had built it in. Claire Vaughn's formal partnership proposal arrived through proper channels 2 weeks after the gala. Cole reviewed it and responded with 3 conditions. All Vaughn Luxury Events functions held at any Mercer Grand property would be required to operate within a service framework that treated back-of-house staff as essential to the event rather than peripheral to it. Events would not be designed around VIP hierarchies that created demeaning conditions for the people executing them. And the Vaughn team would go through a half-day operational orientation at the Ellison before the first contracted event. Not a tour, not a presentation, but actual time spent in the departments that most event clients never saw. Claire agreed to all 3 without negotiation. She also arranged to come in herself on a Tuesday morning, in clothes she would not normally choose for a professional appearance, and spent 4 hours with the housekeeping and kitchen teams, learning what the setup side of a luxury event actually required. She did not mention the experience in any professional context afterward. It had not been for context. It had been for understanding. Nolan Mercer was 12 years old and had the quality of a child raised by a thoughtful person. He noticed things, and he said what he noticed without meanness. He had come to the hotel late in the evening to ride home with his father, and he found him in the lobby near the reception desk still wearing the shirt from the basement. Nolan looked at the oil stain on his father's right cuff, then at the polished marble floor, then back at his father. "Dad," he said, "why didn't you go put on a suit before you came back out?" Cole looked at him for a moment. "Because if the only reason they respect me is the suit," he said, "then they haven't understood anything yet." Nolan considered this with the expression of someone filing it away for a time when it would make full sense. It was late when the last of the gala staff finished clearing the ballroom. The chandeliers were dimmed to a quarter of their full brightness, which gave the stone floor a softer and more honest light, the kind that showed the room as it actually was, rather than as it was arranged to appear. Cole stood near the center of it, hands in his pockets, looking up at the crystals. Claire came in from the side corridor with a folded cloth napkin in her hand. She had been helping the team clear the service tables, something no one had asked her to do. She stopped a few feet away and looked at the same chandeliers for a moment. "You know," she said, "that outfit did more for this hotel tonight than any prepared remarks." Cole turned his head slightly. "No," he said, "the people who dress like this keep this hotel alive every single day." He looked toward the service entrance at the far end of the room, where Evan Brooks and his colleagues from engineering were moving their equipment cases through the door, talking quietly among themselves, at ease in the way people are at ease after hard work completed well. The lights above them were still on. Because of them, the lights above them were still on. The man who had been thrown out of his own gala in a stained work shirt stood in the middle of his hotel without fanfare and without a suit, exactly as he had stood through the entire evening, not to demonstrate what he owned, not to reclaim what had been taken from him, but because the most important thing he had ever built here was not the building itself. It was the understanding that no one who worked inside it should ever be made to feel that what they wore determined what they were worth.